Welcome to the VandySports podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. This week's Vanderbilt football pregame show is brought to you by The Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland and Belk, John Levin and his company Womble Bond Dickinson, and Yeaman Packaging Systems. Topics on today's show are brought to you by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee, and they now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more information, visit their website at mpmci.com. This week, we're previewing Vanderbilt's trip to the Plains to face a struggling Auburn Tiger team. They did beat Kentucky and Lexington last weekend. We'll get into that win for the Tigers, but we'll dive into Vanderbilt and Auburn, 11:45 a.m. Central Time kickoff on the SEC Network. Of course, you can always hear it on 102.5 The Game. We're also going to hear from Clark Lee talking about Diego Pavia and saying it's been tough to restrict him this week. He's a tough kid, so we'll hear from Clark Lee on Diego Pavia's status, especially after being banged up during that Texas game. As usual, we'll get to storylines to watch for with Joey Dwyer heading into the Tigers matchup. And the player this week, edge rusher Khordae Sydnor. Joey caught up with Khordae yesterday and dove into a lot of interesting things and some unique stories that Khordae has to tell throughout his younger life. So looking forward to hearing from Khordae. And then Mitch Light from The Athletic. You guys requested it. I came through with it and talked a lot about the historical significance of this season for Vanderbilt, going back to even the 80s and 90s and even, of course, some of the James Franklin teams, just how this team led by Diego Pavia and the new coaches from New Mexico State compare maybe to some of the other Vanderbilt teams of the past, and also look ahead to this matchup with Auburn. Speaking of Auburn, we close it out with Jay Tate from AuburnRivals.com to preview the Auburn perspective of this game on Saturday. This week's matchup preview is brought to you by The Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Well, let the laundry professionals at The Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. On Saturday, it's Vanderbilt sitting at 5-3 overall, 2-2 in the SEC, traveling to Auburn, who's 3-5 overall and 1-4 in the SEC. The Tigers are 5.5-point favorites in this one. Some people surprised by that. We'll get into that a little bit later. Kickoff 11:45 at Jordan-Hare Stadium. I guess it's pronounced Jordan-Hare Stadium. I've never understood that, but it is what it is. SEC Network is the channel. Taylor Zarzer, Matt Stinchcomb, and Ashley Strawline will be on the call. Vandy heads to the Plains for the 45th meeting against Auburn since 1893. The Commodores have won 3 of their last 4 games. Of course, after losing to Texas on Saturday, Vandy and Auburn have split the last 4 meetings. Commodores beat the Tigers back in 2008. Of course, College Game Day was in Nashville that day. And then they beat the Tigers in 2012 when James Franklin was at the helm. That was a blowout. I want to say Gene Chizik. That was one of the bad Gene Chizik years there at Auburn. But the last 2 meetings, Auburn has beaten Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt has revenge on their mind, especially after last season's domination in Nashville. Maybe it wasn't domination, but it was by one player, Jarquez Hunter. We'll talk a little bit more about him later in the pregame show. This is the first time Vandy and Auburn have played in consecutive seasons since 2008. So, again, with the divisions, East and West, they didn't play a ton. They just didn't, especially Vanderbilt didn't go down there and play in Auburn a whole lot. Vanderbilt has never won at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Now, they've beaten Auburn on the road, but those games have been in Birmingham and Montgomery. So Vanderbilt looking for their first win ever against Auburn at Jordan-Hare Stadium. It helps when you have 9 current Commodore players and coaches who were on the New Mexico State team that beat Auburn at Jordan-Hare Stadium last year. Diego Pavia, Stowers, Berlowitz, Monty Jones, Jerry Kill, Tim Beck, Ghali Muhammad Langford, Melvin Rice, and Garrett Altman. That helps. You got to imagine that helps for Clark Lea's staff. A win for Vanderbilt would make them bowl eligible for the first time since 2018. So the motivation will be there on Saturday for the Commodores. As I mentioned last time out, Vandy pushed number 5 Texas to the final seconds on Saturday, ultimately losing 27-24 at First Bank Stadium. Vandy's 3 losses this season have come by a combined 10 points. So when they lose, it's not by much. Obviously, when they win, it's not by much either. So Vanderbilt has played in tight games really every game this season. Junior Sherrill, going back to that Texas game, had 5 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. Brock Taylor, Big Leg Brock, became the first Vandy kicker to make 5 field goals of 50-plus yards in a career. So Brock Taylor continues to hit big-time field goals. He had a big one right before the half there against Texas that gave the Commodores some momentum heading into the half. Well, back to Diego Pavia. Obviously, we saw throughout this season, even going back to the Alcorn State game, Diego was banged up during that game. He left the Texas game in the second quarter and went into the injury tent with what appeared to be a lower body injury, but, of course, eventually came back with a knee brace on, the same brace he wore against Kentucky. And then going back to the Alcorn State and Kentucky games, as I mentioned, Pavia was also visibly hobbled during those weeks. You know, whether he's hobbled or not, Clark Lee said the kid from Albuquerque has been tough to restrict this week in practice. Take a listen.
He has. I mean, we've tried to put some restrictions on him, but usually that doesn't work. So he wants to practice and he wants to play. So he comes out and goes to work. He's been fine. Obviously, we just got to pay attention as the game goes. I mean, it's just a physical game. It's a tough defense. Nate's going to be ready, but we have full faith that Diego's going to be out there rolling, doing his thing.
There it is. You just heard Clark Lee. Nate Johnson's going to be ready, and I got to imagine Nate Johnson might be, I'm not saying he hasn't been ready in his times when Pavia's gone down. It hasn't been for more than a series, I don't think. So you got to imagine they'll have some more things lined up, maybe than normal for Nate Johnson. But again, that's kind of the definition of Diego Pavia. He's not even going to sit out practice. So really interested still to see how much does the apparent injury to Pavia affect him on Saturday. Well, it's going to be a beautiful day. Obviously, the game kicks off at 11:45 a.m. Central Time there in Auburn. It is Eastern Time, so early afternoon kick there down on the plains. 82 degrees is the high there. That's the day forecast. Winds east at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So it's going to be a hot day. You got some clouds, so maybe it won't be sweltering, but it's going to be hot. It's weird how it hasn't gotten really cold yet in the South, and we're in November. So November 2nd, and it's 82 degrees. So that's I guess that's life in the Southeast here with the weather. But again, should be a beautiful day, whether you're there or not able to watch it. The rain should stay away from Auburn, Alabama. All right, injury report. Vanderbilt, of course, no Christian James. Clark Lee confirmed he's got a back issue. B.J. Diakite as well as turf toe. He'll be out this weekend. Issa Wataha, Colby Taylor, Langston Patterson, Cedric Alexander, and Khordae Sydnor were all originally slated as questionable. But again, Clark Lee also said in his press availability on Thursday that some of those guys are ready and raring to go, of course. But you look at it, and there have been 3 guys that were upgraded to probable as of last night. Issa Wataha, Langston Patterson, and Khordae Sydnor are all probable. And there were a few guys that were added to it. Darian Wiley is questionable. Cedric Alexander, questionable, which isn't great news. But you also have, as I mentioned, Christian James and B.J. Diakite as out. But no Colby Taylor. Well, Colby Taylor is actually on it. My bad. Colby Taylor is listed as questionable, and this is as of Thursday night. So there will be a final injury report coming up, and we'll be sure to get that out to you. All right, let's dive into the Auburn Tigers this season. Auburn obviously is a struggling team. I know they got a win in Lexington, but prior to that, they had lost 4 in a row. They kicked off the season with a win over Alabama A&M, 73-3, and people are like, whoa, this Auburn team might score some points. And then they followed that up with a home loss to California, and that was a precursor to a few more home losses and some embarrassing ones for the Auburn Tigers. They did beat New Mexico, so at that point, they're 2-1 to start the season, but that's when everything starts to go downhill. A home loss to Arkansas, 24-14, and then another home loss to a bad Oklahoma team at the time, 27-21. Then they go on the road for 3 straight. They win 2 out of 3 of those. At Georgia, or they win 1 out of 3, my bad. Georgia and Missouri were losses. Missouri was a close loss in Columbia, but again, they go up to Lexington this past weekend and beat Kentucky 24-10. So again, Hugh Freeze's club they're inconsistent. I'd say that, sitting at 3-5 overall, 1-4 in the conference, but they've got to have this win on Saturday over Vanderbilt if they want to continue to carry that momentum into potential bowl eligibility. Let's dive a little bit more into the numbers on the Tigers. They're averaging 28 points per game. That's bottom half of the league. Not bad. Again, a lot of their numbers are solid, kind of middle of the road numbers for Auburn, both offensively and defensively. They are averaging 431 total yards per game. So again, that's middle sort of pack in the SEC. 253 passing yards per game, 180 yards through the ground per game. That's top half of the league. So they do run the ball well. Their offense is led by Peyton Thorne, 1,500 yards this season, over 1,500 passing yards, 62% completion percentage, 12 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. That interception number is third most in the SEC. So, and essentially all of Thorne's interceptions, and we'll get to this to close out the pregame show with Jay Tate. He got to that. His interceptions have just been at really inopportune times for the Tigers and their fan base, and they've been brutal. So that's the key for them, of course, taking care of the football. He is a capable and willing runner. He's carried the ball 77 times for 175 yards and a couple of touchdowns. I don't think that's his first option typically, obviously, but they will run some QB draws, some read options. He'll keep it. So Vanderbilt has to keep an eye on him, especially with a lot of focus on Jarquez Hunter. Can't forget about Peyton Thorne's legs either. He lost the starting job earlier in the season to Hank Brown, a kid that went to Lipscomb Academy under Trent Dilfer. But since the Arkansas game, he's received all the starts. And while his production doesn't jump off the page, he's done enough to keep the Tigers in winning situations these last few weeks. I know they haven't come away with wins, but they could have won in Columbia. They fought with Georgia, so they've started to play better here these last few weeks. He did finish 20 of 26 through the air at Kentucky with 1 touchdown. So he played better than he has for most of the season in Lexington. A lot of his success on Saturday was due to the domination of Jarquez Hunter. He leads the SEC with 863 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns, 7.2 yards per carry. You go back to last year's game in Nashville between these two, he ran all over Vanderbilt, 183 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's coming off a career-high 278 yards and 2 touchdowns at Kentucky. So might want to keep an eye on Jarquez Hunter if you're Vanderbilt's defense. We'll get into the key to stopping him with Joey Dwyer coming up. Their guy to watch on the outside is Keandre Lambert-Smith, 579 yards, 7 touchdowns through the air this season. That's tied for first in the SEC with Ryan Williams. So Lambert-Smith is a very talented kid. Keep an eye on Malcolm Simmons as well, and Cam Coleman. Cam Coleman's a freshman. They've got weapons. They've also got a good tight end, Rivaldo Fairweather, who hurt Vanderbilt last season. Keep an eye on him in the play-action game. That's another thing I get to with Joey Dwyer. So, again, Auburn's got weapons. They just haven't been able to come up with that huge play at the right time. A lot of that has been on Peyton Thorne. Some have been on the offensive line. See if they can get it going on Saturday against Vanderbilt. On defense for the Tigers, they're giving up 325 yards per game and 112 rushing yards per game. So, again, solid defense. They're only giving up 20 points per game. So Vanderbilt will be dealing with not a Texas-like defense, but a solid defense for Hugh Freeze, led by DJ Durkin, former Florida defensive coordinator. A couple of key players on that Tiger defense. Linebacker Dorian Mousey Jr. leads the team with 50 tackles. Defensive lineman Keldrick Falk leads the team with 7 sacks. That's second in the SEC behind Kennard at South Carolina, Swinson at LSU, and Perkins at Ole Miss. Also, their big nose tackle, Jalen McLeod, has 5 sacks as well. So Auburn's got some dudes up front that can get after the quarterback. So Vanderbilt's offensive line is going to have to play better than they did against Texas. You're not facing a Texas defensive line, which is good. But again, you still got to come out here and play well against the Auburn Tigers. Again, 11:45 a.m. Central Time kickoff on the SEC Network from Jordan-Hare Stadium. It's Vanderbilt and Auburn coming up. We'll talk with Joey Dwyer from right here at VandySports.com. Before we do, though, our guest line is presented by John Levin, good friend of the show. Womble Bond Dickinson, his company, thanks the student athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Our guest line is also presented by Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation, and Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. And now, on to our interview with Joey Dwyer. Kicking off this week's pregame show like we always do with a visit from Joey Dwyer before he heads down to Jordan-Hare Stadium to cover Vanderbilt and Auburn. Joey, I want to start with Vanderbilt's biggest task on Saturday. And we've talked a lot about Texas. I want to make this about Auburn because this is a big game, and this should be about Auburn and Vandy. This isn't a situation where we're stuck on the win in Lexington over Kentucky as opposed to talking about Ball State. We're talking about Auburn here. So Jarquez Hunter is a guy that ran all over Vanderbilt last year, had almost 200 yards. To be exact, he had 183. And last week against Kentucky, 278. So just ran all over a pretty good Kentucky defense like we saw up there in Lexington several weeks ago. What's the key in your mind to defending Jarquez Hunter? Because if he gets loose, Vandy's in trouble.
Well, Billy, that guy's a complete package. And I think there's not one solution to it. I think you got to have multiple guys running at him at all times. You can't leave guys out in space. Kind of like Vandy against Texas's receivers. You've got to just do the little things well and be in position to make plays. And I think that will get you farther than maybe any individual thing. You just got to be in position to not have him one-on-one with a guy and be able to make a move or have him run a guy over. Let me read what Clark Lee said about it. He said, obviously, that's been a huge focus in our early preparation. He's a really good player. He's going to run through tackles, and if you don't have your body into contact, he's going to bounce off you, and he's got the ability to accelerate. CJ Taylor said that Hunter is a talented back and one of the best backs in the country and brings a different challenge than what Vanderbilt has seen thus far. And I think it's pretty hard to argue that he's the leading rusher in the league. Last year, ran for his season high against Vanderbilt on 9.6 yards a carry. That Kentucky game, he had over 12 yards a carry. This is a next level running back, Billy. This is one of the best in the country, probably the best in the league. And Vanderbilt's going to have to be ready for it. I think their line is capable of blocking for him too. If they can limit Jarquez Hunter even a little bit, I think they've got a real path to winning this game, maybe outscoring Auburn by a good bit, because I think Peyton Thorne certainly has some deficiencies, especially if he's not complemented by that run game. I think Hunter has even made him look a little bit better than he is just because of what he is. So, I mean, Jarquez Hunter is the story of the Auburn offense, and I think everything's going to flow based off of how Vanderbilt's able to stop him. And they've got to be sound technically. They've got to be in the right spots. And even then, I think he can make you pay and make it to where he still has a huge game.
What scares me, Joey, potentially in this game is the tight ends and the receivers, for that matter, in the play action game. You get too stuck on Jarquez Hunter, all of a sudden you have tight end Rivaldo Fairweather sneak out of the backfield, or Malcolm Simmons at receiver. Cam Coleman's another really good receiver. They have talented weapons on the outside. Now, Peyton Thorne hasn't always been able to find ways to get them the football, and a lot of times he's thrown it to the other team. 7 interceptions this season. But when Thorne has time and when they've got guys open, they're going to complete those, and they've got guys that can win on the outside on Vanderbilt's DBs. I think it's big that Vanderbilt gets Colby Taylor back, which I think he'll play Saturday, or at least give it a go. Jalen Lackey has improved. We know about Tyson Russell. He's probably more of a run supporter, but also Martell Height has continued to get better and better as well. And Trudell Berry as well made a really good play on Texas last week. So I think another key, obviously the biggest key, is stopping Jarquez Hunter. But if Hunter gashes you a few times and then boom, they find Fairweather, the tight end, on a play action, or Simmons or Coleman, that can also hurt you. So I think Auburn is in an advantageous position right now. They've got Vanderbilt at home. They've got momentum after a road win over Kentucky, and they want to keep it going. And so I That's what scares me. And obviously Jarquez Hunter scares me, Joey, but I think they can have some success if Vanderbilt isn't disciplined enough with their eyes on defense in the play action game.
And it's easy to not be disciplined when Jarquez Hunter's back there.
Right.
I think even you look at the numbers, teams have really fallen for Auburn's running game in terms of how it's worked in the passing game. It's in the middle of the league in passing. It's right behind Alabama. So, I mean, this is not a team that last year we talked about they were the worst throwing offense in the SEC. This year they're middle of the pack and average more yards a game than Vanderbilt. And I don't have all the advanced stats pulled up in front of me, but that doesn't seem like a bad passing game to me. And it seems like one that Vanderbilt is going to have to account for. This is not a one-trick pony anymore. I thought last year they were a one-trick pony with Jarquez Hunter. This year they're not a one-trick pony, though, and they're going to have to be ready for just about everything. But, Billy, this also isn't the Vanderbilt defense of last year that got completely gashed by Jarquez. Right. This is a different unit, and a unit that's really tremendously improved. So I don't think that they're completely in over their heads here. They've played better offenses than Auburn, and they've been able to contain them. You look at Texas, you look at Alabama. I think Alabama was really able to get more than Texas was, but I just look at it and say that run defense, first of all, the run defense, that's the story. It has to be a lot better than it was against Mizzou when they gave up 216 yards. If they are the same team that gave up 104 yards against Texas last week on the ground, I mean, that team's got a much better chance than the team that played Missouri. We'll see which team shows up on Saturday, though, because there's been games where they've gotten gashed. There's also been a lot of games, though, where they've really held their own up front.
Joey, offensively for Vanderbilt, they've got to get going. I mean, the last 2-3 weeks, we talked about it in our last-minute thoughts heading into Texas, that they just haven't been clicking on all cylinders. And now they made a few big plays, obviously, against Texas, scored off of the turnovers. But, Joey, I can't remember the last time. It was probably the first drive against Kentucky where they went down 97 yards and scored. But it feels like in the last month or so, it's been hard for Vanderbilt to start at the 20 or so, or even further inside and go all the way down and score. I think they've got to do that against Auburn. And again, maybe Auburn gives you some turnovers and you're able to score off those again, like you did against Texas. But this Auburn defense is good. That's what I would categorize them at. They're middle of the pack in the SEC in most categories. They've got a guy, Keldrick Falk, with 7 sacks. That's second in the SEC. They've got another guy with 5 sacks. So this is a dangerous defense, but not nearly as good as Texas's, and they're younger. So I think Vanderbilt will be able to scheme Auburn up. Can they stay consistent, and can they take care of the football? The tip passes from Pavia, I think, are going to be big. You've got to take care of the football. If Vandy can take care of the football, Joey, I think they'll be just fine because, again, I think they can scheme up a young and inexperienced Auburn defense.
I mean, I think Vanderbilt is more than capable of going into Jordan-Hare and winning offensively. Diego Pavia, 2-0 against Hugh Freeze throughout his time in college, throughout his career. Hugh Freeze said earlier this week that that's a guy he's sick of. He said he's had enough of Diego Pavia, which I think that's just the most Southern SEC football coach thing to say is, I've had enough of that guy. But, man, he is a guy that can completely transform this game, and he hasn't done that the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think he's been fine. But it certainly hasn't been the Diego Pavia that we saw against Alabama or Virginia Tech or Kentucky, or I guess not even Kentucky, Alabama, Virginia Tech, Alcorn State. The games like that where he's just really picking apart defenses. I think a lot of the reason that they haven't necessarily done what you think they could have done against Kentucky and Ball State and Texas is just, I think they need to get their run game going a little more. You haven't really seen the not even necessarily explosive run plays, but just the continual chunk plays that you felt they were getting early on. I think teams have kind of schemed that in a little more, and the offensive line I don't think has been terrible, but I just think it's been teams are kind of adjusting to what Vanderbilt wants to do on the ground, and it's got to get it going a little bit this weekend against Auburn. I think they're capable of doing it, and their whole offense is really going to flow off of that. They turned it over a little more, I think, because they probably had to rely on the pass a little more. So that's just my key to the game almost, is they got to find a way to get it going on the ground, and I think they got to use Diego Pavia's legs more than they have in the past couple of weeks as well.
Joey, I don't know if you knew this. Well, you did because I told you before we recorded, but Vanderbilt has never won at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Mm-hmm. And now, again, with the divisions, these are two teams that didn't play a ton typically years. You know, that Tennessee's got those teams where they haven't. I think Arkansas is a team for them they haven't seen a ton of. For Vanderbilt, that team has honestly been Auburn. Where They just haven't made a ton of trips down there. They have won road games against Auburn, but they've been in Montgomery or Birmingham. So I think that's a little bit of the reason you look at the line and you look at that 5.5, I think is what it's at right now. Vanderbilt this isn't something Vanderbilt does typically, go on the road at one of the cathedrals in the SEC and win. This is going to be a loud, raucous environment. Auburn's got the stripe out going, and they need this, Joey. This is going to be a desperate Auburn team. They're 3-5. If they get this 4th win, they've got UL Monroe next week. They'll likely get to 5. And then they host A&M, which will probably be prime time. I mean, that'll be on a big network, chance to get to 6. So Auburn desperately needs this. Now, so does Vanderbilt, which I think is gonna make for some fireworks on Saturday. Pavia, Freeze. This is gonna be fun, Joey.
The storylines run deep, Billy. I think especially with them never winning at Jordan-Hare. Vanderbilt, like you said, has never really been a team that's gone into the cathedrals of the SEC and won. You look at Alabama, you look at Auburn, Georgia, all the big stadiums that you think of. You don't necessarily think of a whole lot of memories of Vanderbilt going in and winning, maybe 1 or 2, but man, this would be such a huge win for them. Even if Auburn's down a little bit, even if this is one of the best years in Vanderbilt's program history, it would just be such a huge thing for them to go and win in a place like that at a time of year like this, and especially because it would get them bowl eligible. I think that's another storyline that people maybe have even overlooked a little bit this week. The whole goal of the offseason is make a bowl game. They're right on the doorstep of it, and this is one of their better chances to really put it over the line. Speaking of lines, I was a little surprised that they weren't favored in this game, honestly. And it's weird to say considering they were, 5.5, 6-point underdogs. But
I was surprised it was started at, 7? I was surprised at the number it started. I wasn't necessarily shocked that Auburn was favored in general, but to see how much they're favored by is what surprised me.
Yeah, I wasn't shocked that they were favored, but I think Vanderbilt should be favored. I think Vanderbilt's going to win that game. And maybe that jinxes it because that's the first time I've said that on a pregame show this year, except for Alcorn and Ball State. But man, I don't see how this team comes and overlooks a team like this. I think they're going to be ready to play. I think they're going to be better than they have been in the last couple weeks in front of an environment like that. This team seems to be built for environments like that and to level up their play in an environment like that. So, Billy, I'd be hard pressed to see them losing this game. I think Auburn's good, better than people anticipate. Clark Lee has been saying that all week. But man, I just think Vanderbilt is ready for this moment, and I think they can go and win this game, which is crazy to say. I wouldn't have said it at the beginning of the year, but I mean, they have shown me enough to where it's hard to bet against them in a game like this.
Well, and it's hard to bet against all the turnovers that defense has forced. 2 interceptions on Quinn Ewers, 4 sacks on Ewers as well. One of those sacks last week came from Khordae Sydnor, who you actually caught up with on this week's player interview, Joey, and you got some interesting nuggets on Khordae that I don't think many people know about.
Well, and they're going to have to watch till the next segment to figure that out, Billy. Khordae, I think, has a really good personality and was good talking to him. So we'll cut to that now. Khordae, just what do you think about Auburn? What do you think about what you've seen? Jarquez Hunter, obviously, a big factor. What have you made of them throughout your prep?
They're a good team. They're a good team. Great running game. We know that they're going to try to feed him. He just came off a great game, 200-yard-plus game. So we know we got to prepare for that. But I feel like everything starts with us and our preparation, and we do what we have to do, and we could be able to shut that running game down. But he's definitely a great back. They got a great squad, and we just got to be ready for it when the time comes. So
sure. Obviously, you're new to the program, but Vanderbilt's never won at Jordan-Hare Stadium. What would it mean to you to be part of the first win there?
Oh, it'll be amazing. It'll be amazing. It's like just for the program, the city, the school, just to bring back that win back to Nashville, it'll be awesome.
You guys have rewritten a lot of history this year, doing stuff like that, stuff that you guys as a program have never done before. Just how cool has it been to be a part of that for you?
It's been awesome, man. And also knowing like what goes into it. Coach Lee, all the coaches just instilling in us the confidence and just all the training we went through, man. Like this team is so connected, but just beyond football. That's why I feel like we win so many games. The culture here is amazing, and I think that's been our success this far. So
sure, you're on the availability report this week. Listen to this question. Well, how do you feel physically?
Oh, I feel good. Obviously, it's what week 8, week 9. You're gonna feel those bumps, those bruises, man. But I mean, you're not playing football if you're not a little bit banged up. So I'm fine. I feel like I'm ready to go. So nothing crazy. So
is anybody ever 100%?
Nah. Like I feel like you ask all these guys, none of them gonna be 100%. And I goes for any team in the country right now. It's the dog days of in the season right now. So right now it's really just taking care of your body, and really a lot of it is mental. You just mentally being tough and fighting through the pain, and you'll be fine. So
I feel like you've had to go through some mental toughness the last couple of years. Obviously, your numbers 2 years ago at Purdue were better than last year. Can you just take me through kind of that whole process and coming here and now maybe having better numbers this year?
Yeah, so my freshman year with Coach Braum, he left after that year. We went to the Big Ten Championship, went to Louisville. New coach came in. Guess I didn't fit the scheme as they thought. That's out of my control. So had to make some changes, and now I'm here. But I'm so grateful for the journey, man. I learned so much about myself and how this football stuff works. So I'm just grateful for it. I'm in a better position now, so I can't complain.
What did you learn about yourself throughout that time?
Just make sure that I'm just staying true to myself, and make sure I always have confidence, never doubting myself, because when stuff happens like that, you get a little weary if you can still do it. Just instilling confidence, and just making sure just one day at a time. That's one thing for me. One day at a time, give it your all every day, and you'll be fine, man. Yep.
Did that whole situation kind of put a chip on your shoulder?
Oh, for sure. I mean, anytime you get doubted or people think you can't do nothing, it gives you a little bit more fuel. But it was really never about that situation. It's really about me and just knowing what I can do. So I feel like everything is always about me and where I can go from there, because you control what you can control. So
you can hear it a little bit in your voice where you're from. Can you tell me about where you're from and kind of what that's instilled with you?
Oh yeah, I'm from New York, man. Harlem, New York. Being from Harlem, it's a tough city. So it's just ingrained in me to just grind, be aware, hustle. Nobody gonna give nothing to you, man. So that's what I learned, just being from the city and being in New York. Is fast paced and everything going. So just keep working. That's all I know.
Sure. Yeah. Is that something you've kind of tried to bring here, like the hustle and bustle, like just grind it out thing?
Oh, for sure. When I came in, just a lot of guys didn't know certain pass rush moves, so I feel like I kind of helped them a little bit. They knew some stuff, but I feel like I helped especially the D-line just grow and just pass rush and little techniques that they could use to get an edge on their game, and really the whole team, man, just bringing my swagger, my confidence, and my drive, my hard work. I feel like other people can feel it, and yeah.
We just met, but I've noticed the level of toughness about you because of that, but also every time I see you, I feel like you're smiling. Can you tell me about that? I don't know if that's something you're cognizant of.
Oh, nah, no, it's crazy. Some people always tell me that, but I feel like I'm blessed, man. It's nothing really that I need to be not smiling about. I'm just always in a positive mood. Definitely, I thank my parents for that, just instilling that in me since a kid. Just try to be positive, have a smile on your face, and just be a good person, good human being, man. So
that's something you try to do even through tougher times?
Oh, for sure. Try to just keep a smile on my face even through tough times, because tough times don't last, man. Tough people do. So I'm always a big believer in that. And yeah, so. Sure.
We talked before about the Roger Goodell thing. You were a kid, and we're at the Super Bowl. I saw you ask Russell Wilson a question.
Yeah.
Tell me about that whole experience. How did that happen?
Oh, that was awesome. So basically, it's crazy. Me and my dad is watching. I think maybe it was Thursday Night Football or something. And my dad, a commercial came on TV. Together We Make Football. And my dad was like, "Let's do it," because my dad is a videographer. So he does edits videos and stuff like that. So he created a little story for me. We submitted it, and I got a call back from NFL Films, and we entered the contest. It was based off votes, but I didn't get enough votes. But Roger Goodell personally invited me out to all the festivities for the week when the Super Bowl was in New York that year. And, man, it was a blast, man. I got to just go to the NFL headquarters, sit with Roger Goodell at the game. It was just a surreal moment that I'll never forget. And then, God willing, when I do take that next step to the NFL, that it'll be a full circle moment, man. So I'm blessed and appreciative of that moment, man. So.
What did that mean to you as a kid? Most kids do not get to experience anything like that.
Oh, man, I was like how you said I always smile. I was smiling ear to ear everywhere I went. It's just you dream. It's you dream of being around those guys. Obviously I played football when I was younger, and it's those are the guys I played on a video game with. So it's it's unexplainable with words, man. It was just a great feeling, man. So
who else did you talk to? You talked to Russell Wilson. I think Cam Chancellor was in there. Who else?
Cam. Who else? Who else did I talk to? Champ Bailey. I got to speak to Champ Bailey. I met Prime Time, Deion Sanders there, Randy Moss, and a bunch of, who else? Percy Harvin. I spoke to Percy Harvin. So
underrated.
Yeah, super underrated. But man, it was a great experience. I'll never forget it. So
I think you talked in your commitment video about how that may be a little complacent. Is that something that you talked about?
Oh yeah, my freshman year, so youth football, going into my into the high school, I wasn't like working out like when I was in the 8th grade, 9th grade, like how I was supposed to, and I felt like I kind of got complacent and I kind of felt that because I didn't play as much my freshman and sophomore year. So just learning to like make sure I'm working hard every day, and I think that experience when I was young kind of helped me and mold me to the person I am today. Like you have to put in the work, because if you don't, the football God's not gonna let you be able to where you want to be. So just working hard every day, man, and that's a main mantra that I go by. So
sure. Last thing I got for you, just what do you want people to know about you as a person? What do people need to know about Khordae?
That I'm a loving person, hardworking, always looking out for other people, and I'll say, yeah, I think that's it, man. I'm a loving person, care about others, man. I'm just a good guy overall, man. So yeah.
Mitch Light from The Athletic joins me now as we get rolling with this week's pregame show. Of course, Vanderbilt and Auburn coming up on Saturday. Mitch, thanks again for taking the time. I want to start with this season as a whole. Obviously, you've been sideline reporter before. You went to Vanderbilt. You went to games as a student. You've been through a lot of bad Vanderbilt football seasons, but you've also seen
a few good ones.
Yeah, you've seen some really good ones as well. What has been your reaction through the first, I guess, 3 quarters of the season? What has surprised you the most about as you've watched this team and sort of how they've been built this year?
A lot has surprised. I mean, I think we all have to be honest, based on what happened last season. And I'm a big believer, just not necessarily with Vanderbilt, but just in college football, like margin of victory matters. You play 12 games, you only play 8 conference games. Not all 4-8s, not all 2-10s, not all 5-7s are created equally. And what was Vanderbilt last year? 2-10. That was a bad 2-10. It's just not, Clarkley, he said it was non-competitive football. I liked the offseason changes. I can't sit here and tell you I knew who Tim Beck was 3 years ago, but I knew New Mexico State had a very good offense. I knew who Diego Pavia was. I've long been a believer that Vanderbilt needs to have a running quarterback leading its offense, not necessarily a pure option, but I think Kyle Shermer is probably only pure drop back passer that has led a successful Vanderbilt offense, and they had very good skill those years. So I liked some of the changes there. But you in this era, and let's be honest, I mean, Diego Pavia has panned out very well. Rendon Fontenot has been very good, and obviously Eli Stowers, but it's not like they struck gold other than that in the transfer, as far as rankings and guys. So it wasn't like you could sit here and say, okay, team was terrible last year, but they brought in these 7 transfers who've been starters at Power 5 teams. So really didn't know what to expect at all. I've been a Clarkley fan. I'm a believer in Clarkley. I love the way he runs a program. I love what he says. But the results have not been there for 3 years. So you didn't know what to expect. So then obviously the Virginia Tech game, you can kind of tell right off the bat that this team is different. They have, in this day of the transfer portal, they have managed to find what seems to be a really good chemistry, which is easier to do when you win. You can preach it all in the off season. And then when you actually see some results in that first game, that, there could be some doubters in the locker room, but then everyone comes on board. So it's been obviously a very fun team to watch. Diego Pavia is a fun quarterback in New Mexico State. I love that he's been able to do this on the national stage. And it's, there's nothing, the theme, everyone you talk to, whether a Vanderbilt person or national after the Alabama game, nothing fluky. They just beat Virginia Tech. Beat Kentucky. Now they played a lot of close games, and you look over the course of college football. When you play a lot of close games, you can talk about making the plays and being tough and all that, but things usually even out. You win some, you lose some. They've won some, they've lost some. So very long-winded answer, Billy, but it's been a surprising season. It's just a fun team to watch, and I'm just really, this sounds corny, as someone who worked as part of the team on the radio team, I know how hard everyone in that program works, from the head coach down to the trainers and the marketing people. And it's just great to see those people enjoy success and enjoy the ride of the football season.
I look back at what Grayson McCall was able to do at Coastal Carolina when you compare this offense to some offenses we've seen. There's not a ton over the years that quite look like this. And I know Hugh Freeze compared Vanderbilt to a team like Navy this year, but I think you and I would both agree that Vanderbilt's got some better weapons, and they do like to throw the ball a little bit more within their offense. And they might have to do that here more down the stretch. We'll get into that. But do you look at an offense in the last decade or so that compares to this one, or even a quarterback specifically? Because I struggle to compare Pavia to really anybody. I mean, like skill set wise and body type, I know there's some guys, but the way he plays, it's rare to find a guy that just makes plays. And I saw a pretty funny tweet from somebody during the game. I think it was after his touchdown run against Texas, and basically said that Pavia is a second faster than whoever's chasing him.
No, it was Matt Hinton, who used to freelance for me at Athlon Sports, really good college football. It was 0.001 seconds faster than the person chasing him at all times.
Right. And it was so accurate.
Yeah. So, very good and fair question. I can't really, I do agree with those people. There's clearly a lot of option principles in there, but even Navy this year is not running a true triple option. At The Athletic, Ralph Russo, one of our writers, wrote a good story on their new offensive coordinator who runs some wing T principles. Nowadays in college football, you just can't do one thing. You've got to be multiple. So even the teams that are running the quote unquote option are doing other things. So, Tim Beck seems to, I love the system. He knows, seems like which buttons to push at the right time. And clearly Diego Pavia is good at making decisions. There's a lot of with the read option, which has had very popular years ago, and then it's back and forth, all that stuff. A lot of it, in those of us, I never played football, and it's not just the decision making for the quarterback is so important. You can have a great athlete at that position, but if you don't read, it's not like reading defenses, reading a secondary. If you don't read the defensive end properly, if you don't read your cues properly, it's not going to work. So it's you have to have a good scheme. You have to have a good player at quarterback and a smart player who understands the scheme. And right now, Vanderbilt seems to have that perfect storm. And I can't tell you, where would this team would be without Eli Stowers? I think clearly Diego Pavia is the MVP of the team, but from an offensive standpoint, Stowers is not very far behind.
Let's talk defensively. Beginning of the season, I thought the defense would be, honestly, and throughout fall camp, the better unit. And that's not uncommon throughout fall camps to the defense won the day. That's pretty much every day. But they're statistically not very good. I think they're 90th in the country and around that point of the country in a lot of stats. But what have you seen that has made them? Obviously, they're opportunistic. They make just enough plays. That's what I keep saying. They make enough plays to keep themselves in the game. But what about this defense kept them in the Texas game? I mean, Texas scored 6 points in the second half. And you even go back to some of the other wins, Virginia Tech and of course, Alabama had some big turnovers there of Jalen Milroe. But when you watch this defense, what has made them so opportunistic? Because statistically, the stats have lied to you. And, this team, look at the stats. Maybe they shouldn't have 5 wins at this point, but they do. So how would you categorize what this defense has done so far?
I think the most important thing is this whole team is turnovers. They're not turning the ball over on offense up until the Texas game, and they're forcing turnovers. And, it's cliche. You talk to any coach, turnovers, and they're so important. Let me digress for a minute because I looked this up before. I'm a big believer in yards per play and yards per play difference. So throughout the I'm throwing out the – maybe I shouldn't throw out the Georgia State game, but from a sorting standpoint, I'm looking at just Power 5 opponents. So SEC teams – plus Virginia Tech, so Power 4 opponents now. Last year, Vanderbilt averaged 4.8 yards per play and gave up 6.9 yards per play against Power 5 opponents. So basically, every time the ball was snapped, they were at a 2.1 yard disadvantage. That's, there's how many snaps in a game? 100. That's just enormous. Right. This year, the numbers aren't favorable, but they're better. They're averaging 5.3 yards per play, which is a half a yard better, but still averaging 6.2. So they're basically getting outgained by a yard per play on every snap, which I would love to look this up, actually. My guess is over the last 10 years, if you show me a Power 5 opponent, Power 4/5 opponent that's being outgained by a yard per play, my guess is their winning percentage is about 33%. But here's here's a flaw in the yards per play stat. Over the course of the season, it's great, I think, but this Vanderbilt team, the cliches, they want to control the clock. They limit plays. That stat isn't as when your defense is giving up 6.2 yards per play, it's not as impactful when your defense isn't on the field a lot. That's the Alabama game was the perfect example of that. What Alabama averaged 8 yards per play or whatever it was. Statistically, you look at that box score and you're like, how did Vanderbilt win the game? Oh, it's because time of possession and turnovers. So I think this Vanderbilt team has to follow this model that Clark Lee preaches every game is limit the possessions and win the turnover battle. Because if they don't, we saw what happened against Texas. Like I think Texas, you look at that box score, you watch the game, you're like, Vanderbilt turned it over 3 times. They lost the time of possession. How the hell was it a 3-point game? Like, I think that's a credit to the team that it was that close because you play that game 10 times with that box score, Texas probably wins, by 21 points many of those times. So the defense has been better, like when it matters. Like you said, they forced a lot of field goals. I think the defensive line's better than I thought. The cornerbacks, they've cycled through a lot of guys, seem to be doing a pretty good job. Not, really not getting beat bad that many times. I could look up big plays. Even the Georgia State game losing play, it's good coverage. Guy made an NFL throw and an NFL catch at an inopportune time for Vanderbilt. So this thing it's kind of a well-orchestrated, perfect storm of everything Clark Lee wanted to happen is happening for the most part. And the result is a team that has some really good wins this year.
And we'll see if that continues to happen. It starts Saturday against Auburn. And we had a conversation with Chris Lowe a couple of days ago, and he brought up how the month of November historically has not been very kind to Vanderbilt. And that's obviously due to the lack of depth, and you start to see some injuries late in the season. But I think now is when you start to realize and credit Robert Steiner and what he's done in the strength and conditioning program and just how they have revitalized their training style and how Clark Lee redid and everything in terms of how they train and how they prepare for weeks like this and games like an Auburn game where you might be beat up, but Vanderbilt still finds a way to win. And it reminds me of the win up in Lexington, where that's not a game historically Vanderbilt goes up and wins especially after the most historic win in program history, the Alabama win. How confident are you that they can get to a bowl here down this stretch? You've got a couple of winnable games, Auburn and South Carolina, LSU, Tennessee, likely some, a lot more challenging, but it can still hang in there at least with those teams and maybe even beat them. Are you looking at it as, okay, get to 6 and that's a success for this team? Or do you look at it as this team can string off a few more wins here down the stretch?
Yeah, I think it's going to a bowl game is not a certainty for this Vanderbilt team. I mean, there's 4 games. Like Auburn, I talk about yards per play and statistics and all that. Auburn statistically is a much better team than its record. From a yards per play, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I remember looking last week. They're like 11th in the country in yards per play, but 80th in total in points because they turn the ball over so much. When they don't turn the ball over, they're a good offense. Obviously, they can run the ball well, and Hugh Freeze, we can say what you want about him, the guy's a good offensive coach. So that's obviously going to be a challenge. In South Carolina, Vanderbilt fans and Vanderbilt people like to say X plays away from being 7-1, all that. Well, South Carolina, they got beat bad at home by Ole Miss. Nothing you can take back from that game. But LSU game probably should have won. Alabama game could have won. Oklahoma's not very good, but they go in there and they force 3 turnovers. They win that game. They go up to Lexington. They win 31-6. That defensive line will be among the best that Vanderbilt will play all season, including Texas and Alabama. Dylan Stewart, 5-star true freshman, Rex plays that, can change a game with one play. So then obviously Tennessee has not been probably as good as they're 7-1. I'm going to not consider they're not good, but from earlier in the season, they're not as dominant maybe as some people expected. And then LSU going down to Baton Rouge, obviously very difficult. So, Vanderbilt's going to have to earn its bowl game, its bowl bid. But when you've already beaten Virginia Tech, who's a solid team, you've already beaten Alabama, you've gone up to Kentucky and won, I don't think there's a game on there you say, well, that's like a sure death experience. But they still got to go and win one of these next 4 and then take it from there.
Last thing before I let you go, Mitch, we had a mailbag question on Wednesday asking us how sustainable is what Vanderbilt is doing right now with Tim Beck and Jerry Kill. And obviously players will leave, coaches will leave, and obviously Pavia, we're expecting him to leave after this season. Post Pavia, how sustainable is what Vanderbilt is doing right now? And is that a model that 2, 3, 4 years from now, we're seeing that is still working in Nashville, and Vanderbilt's still making bowl games and getting talented players and maintaining the success? How sustainable in your mind is what they're doing this season down the road?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Pavia is done. I mean, there's no scenario in which he's played 5 years of college football. So
Right.
there's
I base that on rumors alone.
Unless someone just says, you know what, Diego Pavia is a fun guy to watch, we're going to let him play another season of football. I mean, he's played 5 seasons. Usually if you play 4 seasons, you're done. 5 seasons with the COVID, all that stuff. But okay. There's 2 sides to this. One side is the pessimistic side is struck gold with Pavia. Look at the offensive line. You correct me if I'm wrong. I believe all the starters are 5th and 6th year guys. Mostly of them are veterans.
Yep.
Some veterans on the defensive line. You're losing all these guys. Oh no, what are you going to do? The positive side is proof of concept. I'm a big believer in proof of concept in college sports. When the coach can show something, it helps him get other players. Clark Lee and Tim Beck, Jerry Kill can say, look what Diego Pavia does in the system. He's 5'10", whatever. You're a better athlete. You're a better, not that they want to slight their boy Diego, but you know what I'm saying? They can go show this, and then, hey, we did this without much depth at wide receiver. You come in here at wide receiver, you can do this. We did this. You come be part of this next wave of offensive linemen. So I think they're obviously a far more attractive spot in the portal. The downside of turning over rosters is chemistry. This team seems to, like I mentioned earlier, and you're around the program, seems to have legitimately good chemistry. They like playing with each other. When you turn over the roster, you bring in guys in who expect to play. A hypothetical situation that can happen in any program. You bring in 4 tackles in the offseason because you have no tackle. Well, all 4 of those guys expect to play. What about that one tackle? Maybe one of the tackles is fine being a reserve. What about that other tackle who's not fine and starts, talking bad about the coach? Again, these are all hypothetical things but they do happen at programs. So my concern would be, and I'm sure Clark doesn't want to completely turn over rosters, but there's going to be a lot of holes to fill. So can you keep your culture and your chemistry with a lot of changes? And can you show, yes, it can be done at Vanderbilt. It can be done with a fun offense too. It's not like this team, this team's having fun. So I think those are that's the optimistic look. The pessimistic look would be like, wow, just once in a generation quarterback for this offense. So, we're going to find out soon enough.
We'll see. It's going to be really interesting to see if it's sustainable. I know there's people out there, like you said, that doubt it, but at the same time, Clark Lee isn't going anywhere. So that's the other side of that. Mitch, thank you so much. Obviously, enjoy the college football weekend. I know you were out of town for the Alabama game, and I'm not sure if you'll be out of town this weekend, but another big one for Vandy as they head to the Plains.
Quick fun story on that if you got the time. So I was visiting my daughter who's living in Madrid for a couple of years, and my son is studying abroad. He's junior in college. He's studying abroad in Florence, Italy. So we were out of town. We went out to dinner with my daughter. Had some drinks with my daughter and her friends. And the Vanderbilt Alabama game starts at 10:15 local time in Madrid. And you can't watch them. There's no you have to have a VPN or whatever. I was just on a vacation, so I'm at a place having a drink, and I look at my phone. It's 7-0 Vanderbilt, and I take a screenshot jokingly. I'll have this on my phone. Vanderbilt 7, Alabama nothing. Show my daughter, whatever like that. And then I guess the pick 6 happened right after. It's 13-0. So we get back to our Airbnb in Madrid, and it's midnight, whatever, and it's halftime. Vanderbilt's winning, but we had a 6 a.m. wake up call. We were going to Barcelona the next morning, so we had a train. So I was like, you know what? I just flew over all night 2 nights ago. I don't want to stay up till 3 a.m. and then just get an hour of sleep, whatever like that. So I go to bed and it's tied. Our Vanderbilt's up 21-13 or something like that. And I put my phone on do not disturb. So my idiot friends don't wake me up with texts and stuff like that. But I don't know. You have an iPhone, I assume. When you're on do not disturb, if someone's in your favorites and they call you, it goes through because they So my son calls me. He's in Florence watching the game. And I don't pick up the phone because I'm half asleep, whatever. But I figure if Gabe's calling me at 2 a.m, something weird's going on. So I look and it's 40-28 at that point. Yeah, 40. Vanderbilt must have just scored 40-28. So I'm like, I'm not going back to sleep. So I get on the couch and I get on my laptop and I'm following like play by play on the ESPN box score or whatever like that. So I was about 3 a.m. in the middle of excuse me, knocked over my microphone there. In the middle of a dark Airbnb in Madrid with the biggest win for Vanderbilt in years. But I will tell you, later that week, like I think we were at a restaurant or we're in the Madrid airport coming home. My wife was wearing a Vanderbilt shirt. Multiple people came up to her and said, "Hey, did you get a piece of the goalpost or something like that?" So it was an international story.
That's all. I love the timing of that. You just happen to be in another country.
I know. It's not like I'm a world traveler either. It's the second time I've ever left the country. So all my friends were like, "You just don't come back." So.
Yeah, stay out there.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of other stories that Vanderbilt people have of that.
Yeah.
And, you're in Spain. Your wife gets a shout out for the Vanderbilt shirt. That's pretty cool.
No doubt.
Mitch, hopefully get another chance to do that. Maybe one of these games here in the next few years. Have another fun story. But thank you so much for taking the time.
All right, take care, Billy.
All right, wrapping up this week's pregame show with Jay Tate from AuburnRivals.com and covering Auburn football for a long time. Jay, thanks for taking the time. How you doing?
It is great to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with Auburn so far this season. And it's been a really interesting year. They've had a lot of close losses, but all of a sudden you go up to Lexington if you're Hugh Freeze and the Tigers and you get a win, a big win heading into this game against Vanderbilt. You've got a home game against UL Monroe, I think it is, next week. So how's the momentum right now? I mean, we just talked off air a little bit that you think Auburn's a pretty good team. There's some situational mess ups that Auburn has had this year that have really hurt them. But what did that win over Kentucky do for this team and their momentum right now?
Yeah, I think it was huge. In a way, it was kind of a proof of concept that the things that they were doing earlier in the season made sense and they actually would work. I have felt all along that Auburn's a pretty good football team. They're not going to challenge for the conference title or anything like that, but I felt like, last year they were just bad. This year, I felt like they're better, and statistically, their footprint looks like a pretty good team, but they were losing games from just not knowing how to win and just being inexperienced and silly. So in the Cal game back in September, they had 5 turnovers. I mean, I don't know what the chances are of any team that has 5 turnovers to win a game, maybe 5% or 7%. The next week, they do the same thing against Arkansas, another 5 turnovers. So that's 10 turnovers in 2 games, and you're like, they got no chance. Against Oklahoma, they couldn't finish drives. They literally got a 3rd and goal at the 1 and got no points out of it. They had a pick 6. I mean, it was just like these little screw-ups that just kept wrecking them. Against Kentucky, everybody figured, they're going to go up there and do it again, and they really didn't. They had 1 turnover. It was a pick early in the game. They completely overcame that, and then they created 2 turnovers. It's unusual that Auburn has more takeaways than giveaways because I think they're 2nd worst in the country as far as turnover margin. So once they got that under control, man, they're a much better team. They all of a sudden they look like they know what they're doing, but they did all along. They just kept having these, backbreaking problems over and over and over again. I think it's because they're just mentally weak. But they definitely toughened up against Kentucky. And the funny thing about it is they went into that game wanting to throw the football around. And it was a disaster. Their first quarter at Kentucky was a mess, dude. They were getting killed again. They were down 10-0, but they started running the football kind of in a panic move of just searching for something that works. And lo and behold, it starts working great. And their tailback, Jarquez Hunter, rushed for, I think, 275 or something like that. And all of a sudden, they look like, monsters of the Midway.
You mentioned mentally weak. Usually that starts with the head coach.
Does.
Do you get the sense that Auburn fans are getting a little anxious on Hugh Freeze, or they've got kind of a hidden confidence in him that they think is when he gets his players in there, he'll be able to, because that's what every coach says. And that's what people like to say, making excuses for some coaches. Well, he doesn't have his guys in there yet. I mean, do you believe in that? And how do the Auburn fans feel about Hugh Freeze right now?
I think they're largely skeptical. You're looking at a program here in Auburn where, Gus Malzahn kind of fell apart and didn't do a very good job at the end. And then they hired a guy named Brian Harsin, who might be the worst coach a major college coach I've ever known. And then he made it worse. And so they're really cheering for Hugh to do well. But the results have been poor. I mean, the first year they weren't very good. This year, of course, they were really bad. They were 2-5 at one point. They're 3-5 now, so it's not too far from that. The thing is, the saving grace for him is he's recruited really well. They've got their class right now, assuming they were able to hold it. It's going to be a top 5 class, which is great for Auburn. Last year was like top 10-ish. So he's bringing in players, and I think everybody's encouraged by that because the talent level at Auburn was really, really bad when he showed up. People are skeptical because the results on the field have been poor. He's just somewhat popular. And you talked about mentally weak earlier. I mean, that's a tough thing to levy at somebody and say, hey, you're mentally weak. I can't prove that. But Hugh, to me, his press conferences seem like therapy a lot of times. He is painfully honest about things, and it makes him look weak, even though I think he's just being honest. And look, man, there's a whole story with Hugh Freeze, his whole redemption arc of getting in trouble at Ole Miss, rehabilitating his image at Liberty, coming to Auburn and trying to take that next step forward. And he loves to be very honest. He feels like transparency is key. Some people don't understand that. I appreciate that, both as somebody who has a master's in psychology and also a beat writer who likes to write interesting stuff. So it's a good thing, but I think some people just can't handle honesty these days.
Fair enough. Let's talk about Peyton Thorne. His stats aren't awful. I mean, over 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns. And, people always talk about the interceptions, 7 interceptions. It's not great, but I mean, I've seen worse at times in the SEC. It is third most in the conference, but I mean, it's not like he's throwing an interception every time he drops back. He's a capable and willing runner, which I think is an interesting part of his game. What's the story on him? Because obviously lost the starting job to Hank Brown. And I don't know if people thought they're going to go fully to Hank Brown, but ever since, that Arkansas game, he's started to play a little bit better. So what have you seen from Peyton Thorne and this offense that has been able to jolt them up a little bit here in the last 2-3 weeks?
He lost his confidence in the Cal game, bottom line. He just bottomed out, and he looked like a helpless, scared individual, which he probably was, although he wouldn't admit it. So then they go to Hank Brown. Hank Brown can't see robbers. He can't see underneath zone defenders. And so he gets picked every 4th or 5th throw, I swear. So they had to go back to Peyton. Peyton's a decent quarterback, like you mentioned. Statistically, he can run. He's actually a pretty decent runner, honestly. I mean, he's not a triple threat, really, but he can run. And they've been smarter with him. They've asked him to do less. The problem with Peyton is, and this is just my opinion, again, my psychology background is probably leaking into this. I think Peyton has a problem when the weight of expectations are on his shoulders directly. When he feels like he's got to carry everything. And I think there were times early in the season where they were asking him to do that. So it was a bad match. Now they're more willing to use Jarquez Hunter, who I think has been a stud all along. I don't understand why they have to get to game 7 to start giving him 25 or 30 touches. I do not understand this because he's been a stud all along. And I think when they start doing that with Jarquez, it takes the pressure off Peyton. And all of a sudden, he's a much better player. He's like a Scottie Pippen, and he never was meant to be a Jordan, if that makes sense. And I think just the frustration that he showed in that Cal game, he just has a face where, like, when he's frustrated, he looks like he's pouting. I don't necessarily think that he is, but he looks that way. And so on the sideline, the fans see Hugh, like, screaming at him and him kind of shrugging his shoulders, and he just looks like a sad sap kind of. But, I mean, he's not that person. He's been his dad's a coach. His granddad was a coach. I mean, he's been berated a bunch of times. I think he's tough, and I think he's playing better now that they're scheming around him a little bit. I mean, he's not a liability. He's just not a star.
I'm glad you mentioned Jarquez Hunter. You go back to the Vanderbilt game last year, had another, one of his career days, 183 yards and a couple of touchdowns. And then last week, an even better day, almost 300 rushing yards against Kentucky, a couple of touchdowns. Went back and watched the highlights and was just running all over a pretty good Kentucky defense. So what makes Jarquez Hunter so tough to bring down? I mean, he's big, but it's not like he's he's not a Derrick Henry. I don't think there's another Derrick Henry, but he's maybe not be the tallest guy, but if he just bounces off defenders. So what about Jarquez Hunter makes him tough to defend if you're a defense? And obviously, as we all know, he's the focus this week for Vanderbilt's defense.
Jarquez is a great story. He's a kid from Central Mississippi who was not highly recruited. Probably the best player Brian Harsin signed, or the only really good player he signed. He's from Philadelphia, Mississippi, and he's a state powerlifting champion. Okay, you don't necessarily see that from tailbacks very often. So he's a very strong individual, and he looks it too, even though he's not tall. So you've got hard scrabble kid from Central Mississippi, completely overlooked in recruiting, and he's a powerlifting champion. So what is he now as a fully fleshed out college player? Well, he's an extremely strong tailback, and he's also pissed off all the time at anybody, takes it personally when someone tries to tackle him. So he likes to truck people. He's always looking for an extra yard. He has no problem lowering his shoulder and taking on any defender. And he has the strength in the lower body to really just power through stuff. So he's got to be one of the top 10 tailbacks in the country as far as yak yards. And I think it's just kind of his determination and will, along with incredible strength, that makes him good. As someone who's watched him, every carry he's made at Auburn, I thought he was an impatient runner early in his career. They would try to have him run zones, which is a big thing they were doing with Harsin. And he was just so impatient. He would run into his linemen's butts and he would just kind of create his own problems. Now he's a little more patient in the zone game, and they can kind of use him that way. He's always been a really good gap runner, but they kind of try to go both ways with this at Auburn now. And he's a much better zone runner now. And so to me, he's just a much more fully featured tailback. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, although they don't use him that much because they have a better receiving tailback in Jamari Alston. But Jarquez is just a bell cow, battering ram type Jerome Bettis dude. And he's a lot of fun to watch, man. And he's a fun guy to cheer for because he's just like country and doesn't take himself too seriously. And again, you love seeing kids that kind of fight their way up.
Absolutely. Another kid that's fought his way up is Diego Pavia from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Started at New Mexico Military Institute. Obviously was Conference USA Player of the Year last year at New Mexico State. Went on the road and beat Auburn. And the year before that, beat Hugh Freeze when he was at Liberty. Hugh Freeze can't lose to Diego Pavia a third time, right?
Hell yeah, he can, because Vanderbilt's pretty damn good right now. Yeah, that was a nightmare game last night. The game with New Mexico State last year, I think, was the worst Auburn loss I've ever seen. I've been covering Auburn since '99, so that was a stinger. You look back at it, and it's not as bad as somebody who knows football because Jerry Kill is super underrated. His career kind of got sidetracked because of you guys know, a specific health issue. It wasn't because he wasn't good. And Pavia is just he's like Brett Favre, reincarnated. I don't know if he's quite as good as Brett Favre, but in the college game he is. And so he's like this swashbuckling badass who's not scared of anything. And he's still paired up with his coach that kind of unlocked all of his potential. So, yeah, he is a problem. He has embarrassed Hugh Freeze twice. Hugh doesn't want to do it again. But, Auburn's defense, I don't know, man. Like, the pass rush is okay-ish. They're really thin, the defensive backfield, although the guys they've been playing have been pretty good. They're just very young back there. I just think Vanderbilt's going to have a way to scheme up some stuff to mess with these very young defensive backs. And Pavia is the kind of guy that can really make that pop.
I'm glad you mentioned Auburn's defense. What are some other weaknesses within this Auburn team that you think Vanderbilt could potentially expose on Saturday?
Well, I think they're weak at linebacker. I don't like their options there. They have a freshman, number 16, named DeMarcus Riddick, who I think is a stud, but they only play him like 15 snaps a game right now because he's so young and he gets out of position. The great thing about DeMarcus is, from an Auburn perspective, he's a great spy linebacker because he's just an incredible athlete. So if they're going to spy Pavia, I think DeMarcus Riddick's a pretty dang good guy to do it. So that gives them an advantage there. But generally, I don't like him at linebacker. And generally, I just don't love their run defense. You can push those guys around, particularly like that nose. Like Auburn's pretty good at end. They've got some ends that can bring it from the outside, but inside, not so much. And cornerback, I thought, was going to be a disaster. They had a guy go down in the Oklahoma game, Champ Anthony, with a broken leg, and I thought, oh, God, here we go. Because the other cornerback is a sophomore, so they had to go to a true freshman to play that spot, and he's been great. His name's Jay Crawford, number 23, a guy who is, he's part of a good recruiting class, but I didn't think of him as a crown jewel. Dude, he plays every snap now. He's been really good. He had a pick against Kentucky. So all of a sudden, a position that I thought would be really bad is actually solid. So they're just still very young back there and a really smart, you got a quarterback in Pavi's played a lot of snaps. You got coaches that know what they're doing, particularly Jerry Kill. I think that there's a way you can just kind of scheme them up and beat them.
You mentioned the defensive back, Champ Anthony, there. I saw Keontae Scott is another defensive back that's questionable for Auburn. What are you hearing there? Do you think he's going to maybe try to give it a go on Saturday? Because I've seen that he's one of their better defensive players.
Yeah, questionable is a great word for Keontae. He was a good player last year. They thought he was going to go in the portal. They fought to keep him. They brought him back, and he's been bad. I don't even think he's injured, honestly, Billy. He's listed as he is. Last week, he didn't play a single snap on defense, but he returned punts. And we've all been skeptical. Like, if you're hurt, why are you returning punts and not playing defense? I think he's just been outmoded. I think they have players they like better. And he has not been a good player this year, honestly. Let's be honest with you.
Yeah. Last thing for you, I saw it's a stripe out there at Jordan-Hare Stadium.
Stripe out. Ooh,
yeah.
Scary.
Jordan-Hare is a place Vanderbilt has never won at. Vanderbilt has beaten Auburn on the road, but it's been at Birmingham or Montgomery, Alabama. What makes Jordan-Hare so tough, not specifically for Vanderbilt, but for really any team to go into and win?
Just the same usual stuff. It's a big crowd. They're sold out. It gets loud. I don't think the striping does anything. It's just it's just a raucous place, and they do fill it up. And for whatever reason, it's loud there. It's not the loudest stadium I've ever been in, but it's pretty dang loud. And Auburn fans are frothy. They want wins, man. Auburn hasn't really gotten on a run in football since 2017, and that run ended like a wet fart because they got their tailback hurt and they couldn't do anything after that. So everybody's just been jonesing for this, finally get Auburn going again. And, at least they won a game. That's good, right? That's 2 0-4 conference starts for them last year and this year. So they get the win against Kentucky that a lot of people didn't expect. And then now it's like, maybe it's coming all together, except they still have to go to Alabama, except they still have Texas A&M. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. But Auburn fans are fired up, dude. And they are, Hugh talks all the time. They're the best fans in America. Every coach says that. But Auburn fans are very resilient. I'm going to give them that. Yep. They still love their team even when it's crap. This team is not crap. And so maybe they're starting to get encouraged.
We'll see. Auburn and Vandy, 11:45 kickoff there at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Jay, thank you so much for taking the time.
Appreciate it, my man.
All right, that'll do it for another pregame show, another solid pregame show heading into the Vanderbilt and Auburn game, 11:45 a.m. Central Time kickoff on the SEC Network. Big thanks to Clark Lee for his comments, Joey Dwyer, of course, Khordae Sydnor, Vanderbilt edge rusher. He's been a huge part of Vanderbilt's success. It was really cool to hear that conversation with him and Joey. Also, Mitch Light from The Athletic. You guys requested it. I answered, and it's always good catching up with Mitch and his numbers and his experience covering Vanderbilt football as well. And then, again, big thanks to our Auburn friend Jay Tate from AuburnRivals.com to preview this game from the Auburn perspective. This podcast has always been free, and we plan for it to stay that way. So here's how you can keep it that way. Number one, give the podcast a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to VandySports.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year and $9.99 a month. That helps us tremendously. Also, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel. All kinds of different content there. Rapid reactions, press conferences, live shows. Maybe not all the time live shows, but sometimes we will go live. Post-game reactions, all kinds of different content going up on our YouTube channel. That's the place to be, Vandy Sports YouTube channel. Like this video, give us a comment, subscribe to our channel while you're at it. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, no better time to become a football sponsor. Email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast.